For this video, I won't be including anything from Season 8 like the death of the Night King or Jon killing Daenerys because those moments are drenched in plot holes, plot armor, contrivances, and overall bad writing. If I were to include any best moments from Season 8, I'd rather pick something like Brienne becoming a knight or Clegane, given that they're at least enjoyable, but I'd rather just watch any of my top 25 moments on repeat. To apply one ground rule for this ranking, I won't be bundling a bunch of related moments together like Arya and Tywin's scenes, because I feel like that would be a bit unfair towards scenes that are more continuous. And as always, this is my opinion. Number 25, Viserion destroying the wall. You know what? Scratch that. I'm making this an honorable mention. This scene would be 10 times better if David and Dan had not shown the Night King turning Viserion at the end of Beyond the Wall. It would actually give the ending of the season a lot more shock and awe, instead of everyone just waiting for it to happen. Because of this, it gives the whole scene a much more predictable nature. It is visually spectacular, but it's just a moment where you go, yep, that was cool, and then move on since it doesn't add much besides it being an extension to the prior reveal. It's like if David and Dan were to show us a scene of Tywin deliberating with Walder Frey before the Red Wedding to kill Robb Stark. That initial dialogue would be shocking, but it would ruin the big moment of the Red Wedding. So instead of Viserion destroying the wall, I'd rather pick a scene with a lot more value to contribute, which is Tywin's opening scene as number 25. This is a pure, unadulterated classic Tywin Lannister scene. Literally every line that he delivers in this scene has gained a status as if they were lines in the Holy Bible.
A lion doesn't concern himself with the opinions of the sheep.
Tywin Lannister oozes wisdom with every breath he takes, and his opening scene is by far one of his best, because he's not just lecturing Jaime, but he's also lecturing the audience about how the Lannisters operate. All of these lines are great, and the reason why I'm not putting this higher on the list is because this isn't a dialogue scene that's injected with a lot of emotion. And that's not the fault of this scene, that's just me liking dialogue scenes that have more of an emotional punch to them. But as it stands though, this is a perfect introduction to not just Tywin Lannister, but to also House Lannister. And come on, skinning a deer while delivering a monologue is so goddamn badass. Number 24, Oberyn Martell declaring he'd fight for Tyrion. Now for this scene, I'm not just referring to the twist reveal that Oberyn will be Tyrion's champion, but also the long and juicy monologue that Oberyn delivers prior to the twist. I think this is a very heartbreaking reveal that shows the prejudice that Cersei has always felt towards Tyrion through a more neutral perspective. This is shown when Oberyn details his interaction with what he believed at the time would be Cersei unveiling a freak, but in actuality, it was just a normal baby. When this revelation happens, the music kicks in for a very sincere moment.
It doesn't matter, she told us. Everyone says he will die soon. I hope they are right.
This whole scene is also heavily carried by the acting. Pedro Pascal is a goddamn legend, and you'd be mistaken if one of his main monologues that ends with a triumphant punch wouldn't be on this list. I really enjoy the irony of this scene too. A man who fundamentally hates Lannisters ends up helping a Lannister. It's overall very gratifying having the scene in a season where Tyrion was essentially getting dunked on by every character in the show. Thank you, Oberyn. I love you, man. I would gladly take a spin-off where we just go on adventures with you. Number 23, Robert and Cersei having a conversation. At face value, it may seem weird to be putting this scene on the list given how casual it is, but almost every line is so distinctly quotable. We have Cersei poking fun at Robert and Ned's bromance.
I'm sorry your marriage to Ned Stark didn't work out.
Robert's clever rebuttal to Cersei's strategic advice.
It's a neat little trick you do. You move your lips and your father's voice comes out.
Foreshadowing for when the Dothraki eventually make it to Westeros. Witnessing how intellectual Robert is when he's not drunk out of his mind. A sincere look as to what went wrong with their relationship, and the tragedy of what lust can do to a man through Robert's mention of Lyanna.
And 7 kingdoms couldn't fill the hole she left behind.
This scene consistently offers so much value in terms of character development and even world building, especially for Robert's rebellion. This whole scene is about 6 minutes long, and it breezes by due to the sheer fact of how intriguing the dialogue is. Overall, a shining example as to how great dialogue scenes were in the earlier seasons. Number 22, Chaos is a Ladder. The classic iconic duo of intellectual battles that is Varys and Littlefinger. There's quite a few scenes where they hash it out, but I think my favorite is the one in Season 3 where Littlefinger delivers one of his best monologues in the show about chaos. The only reason why I'm putting this scene a bit low on the list is that it's kind of short. The scene lasts for about 4 minutes, and if it was longer and we had more sparring between Varys and Littlefinger, then I would definitely put it higher. But as the scene stands, Varys and Littlefinger have one round of jabs until they start talking about the realm, which then leads into the Chaos monologue. It's still completely stellar, and I think Aidan Gillen, who plays Littlefinger, peaks here in terms of acting. His voice and portrayal of Littlefinger is so chilling and evil. It really makes you think that his character is destined for great things, but we know that's not the case, unfortunately. Number 21. Olenna's death scene. This probably has to be single-handedly the most badass death scene in the show. Maybe besides Lyanna Mormont taking down the giant, but still. Olenna's revelation to Jaime that she killed Joffrey is a perfect way to end her character. And this should go without saying, but Olenna Tyrell is one of the best characters in Game of Thrones. Which is in large part a thank you to Diana Rigg's outstanding performance, and it's a shame that she passed away in 2020, a truly terrible year. But going back to her character, I just loved how much of a savage she could be at any moment. Because of that, she's a very intimidating character, along with her being very smart. This mostly culminates and all comes together in her final scene when Jaime defeats her army. The back and forth dialogue they have before the revelation is somewhat entertaining in that we have a funny roast of Olenna talking about Jaime's mistakes.
There are always lessons in failures.
Yes. You must be very wise by now.
However, Jaime didn't have a lot of interesting dialogue in this scene, and it was basically just a showcase for Lady Olenna, which is fine for the revelation, but not necessarily for the first half, where it was more of a back and forth between the two characters. That aspect could be better, but undeniably carried by Olenna spilling the beans on Joffrey's death, which warrants a fantastic reaction from Jaime. Number 20. Arya killing the Freys. Initially, I would put this moment a lot higher given I really like Arya and how cool her power set is in Game of Thrones, and even the fact that this is the only time she actually uses her power. But the double-dipping nature of Arya killing the Freys in 2 back-to-back scenes feels pretty cheap. What I mean by this is that I really enjoyed Arya killing Walder Frey, but then reusing practically the same scene in Season 7 where Arya kills the rest of the Freys for the same effect feels like lazy writing. It's kind of like what I highlighted earlier with Viserion and how David and Dan revealed his undead resurrection in a prior scene. If they hadn't have included the death of Walder Frey in Season 6 and just opened Season 7 with how it originally opens, then I think it would be infinitely better. It would be a much more surprising and crazy moment to reveal that Walder Frey was actually Arya the whole time, instead of how the scene currently is, in which the audience already knows that it's Arya. This again leads to more of a predictable outcome, when we could have had a much better scene with crazier payoff. This is a fix that would put it closer to the top 15 for me, instead of the 20s. And again, if I'm bringing up any negative aspects for different moments, that's just me arguing why it shouldn't be higher on the list. Number 19. The Hound and Arya's opening scene in Season 4. To me, this is a personal favorite moment that you probably wouldn't find on any other list for top moments. In terms of characters, Arya and the Hound's duo adventure is probably peak excitement in the show for me. Their unlikely bond, back and forth hilarious banter, and their father and daughter like relationship is truly special. I was pondering over which scenes to pick from their adventures, and this one has them all. It has all the humor you could ever ask for, and some of those moments have become legendary memes like the Hound wanting to eat all the chicken. I would love to play a couple of those short clips as an example of the humor, but the Hound uttering a single line would definitely demonetize this whole video given that the C word is considered a racial slur according to YouTube. But anyways, even when the action starts, this is the first time in the show where Arya becomes more of her own and helps the Hound in a fight. The callback to Season 2 where the Lannister soldier killed Lamy with Needle was brilliant, and I'm a slut for the Hound eviscerating anyone who gets in his way. Also, the tension before the fight was perfectly built up too, with the Hound degrading the Lannister soldier at every chance he had. Overall, this is a scene I'd love to rewatch and it just makes me so happy. It's a perfect end to the first episode for Season 4, and Arya even got her own horsey to get away from the Hound's stench. Poggers. Number 18. Jon Snow's death. At the time when Season 5 was airing, this was a crazy cliffhanger and everyone was losing their shit. I thought it was easily going to be one of the best moments, but man, that ending has not aged very well. The reason why it was really good, putting emphasis on was that it was as though the show was returning back to its roots and defying expectations and killing one of the primary characters in the story. It's still a pretty great scene on its own, but the follow-up afterwards has really diminished this moment down to number 18 for me. The fact that Jon Snow's resurrection really has no purpose whatsoever in terms of the grand scheme of the Long Night makes this moment feel like a cheap cliffhanger. In essence, it acts as though it just mimics what was once great about the show in terms of killing main characters. The scene does make sense within Season 5 as a consequence of Jon bringing the wildlings south of the Wall, so in terms of writing, it's logical for Jon to die here, and is by no means forced. As an isolated moment within Season 5, it's really a great ending. The betrayal of Ollie and the utter and literal heartbreak that Jon endures is still a harrowing moment. The acting from both Ollie and Jon really sells this scene as being one of the saddest moments in the series. Number 17. Viserys' death scene. Instead of putting in Jaime pushing Bran out of the tower in here, which is pretty iconic, I instead like Viserys' death scene as being the first primary shocking moment that sets the tone for Game of Thrones. Don't get me wrong, Bran's fall sets a great precedence too given how dark the scene is, but some of the shock is lost over the fact that Bran doesn't actually die. However, with Viserys' death, he dies in such a gruesome and ironic way that it shows how devious and clever the show can be. And not to mention how he was kind of an important character, given that he was one of the last Targaryens. I also genuinely just adore how well the acting is on Viserys' part, and how much of an entitled brat he was. This made us hate him so much, and the fact that Daenerys shows no remorse is cold as hell. Number 16. Dany taking the Unsullied. This is essentially Dany's first excellent scene where she becomes a badass. Before this, she had a few moments like standing up to her brother, and yeah, that was really it besides her getting her dragons in Season 1, since Season 2 was kind of a snooze fest for her journey. However, Dany taking the Unsullied with force drastically changes the pace at which her plotline was moving and actually makes it a lot more intriguing. It feels like she's actually progressing to becoming the conqueror she is meant to be, besides complaining about dragons. That, and the scene on its own is pretty rad given that up until that point, she hasn't done anything truly badass to warrant her to be a conqueror, but the scene essentially gives her a rite of passage. She gains our respect, and this shot alone with the explosions behind her is so memorable. This is how I choose to remember Dany, not the shriveling, whining mad queen that she ended up being. Number 15. The death of Shae and Tywin. Now this is just an emotional and wild rollercoaster of a scene. The fact that they roped Shae's death scene in here when Tyrion was expecting to find his father was so heartbreaking. The blocking of having Shae's face right next to Tyrion's face as he choked her out exudes a haunting layer of grief. Also, I love how much of a burn it is for Tyrion to find out that Tywin is having sex with the love of his life. Get absolutely rolled, Tyrion. Then after this overwhelming swell of emotions, that is the death of Shae, we have Tywin's confrontation. The fact that Tywin plays the scene as though he still has power over Tyrion and is confident in his ability to talk him down shows how stoic he is. At his most vulnerable, he still comes across as an absolute Chad.
And what? You'll kill your own father in the privy? No.
Then when he loses that power, he goes straight for Tyrion's jugular by denouncing him, despite just calling Tyrion his son. Overall, a magnificent resolution to the King's Landing plotline of Season 4. Number 14. The Tower of Joy. For this scene, I'm going to be pairing together the two Tower of Joy scenes since they are essentially taking place back to back, and is a direct continuation from where the last one left off. But for the opening Tower of Joy scene, the fight with Arthur Dayne was pretty legendary. I'm a big fan of action scenes where they pit someone against multiple adversaries and are still able to make it look believable like in the first Ip Man. Then even more bonus points are added on to the fact that this man is dual-wielding swords. What an insane mad lad. That, and it's impressively very well shot and isn't cut to shit in terms of editing. Like, we actually have a somewhat long take wide shot showing the action. Absolute pog. The choreography more than makes up for the fact that someone shouldn't really win in a fight in this circumstance. Then after that, we have the reveal that Jon Snow is a Targaryen. So I mean, a great action scene paired with one of the biggest reveals of the show makes this a top tier scene. Number 13. The Spoils of War. So visually, this is a pretty sick sequence where we finally get the long-awaited payoff of Dragon Mayhem. We technically got it at the end of Season 6, but that was pretty underwhelming given that they only destroyed one ship. But here, Daenerys is rolling the Lannisters, and the production value of the battle sequence is pretty impressive. Burning dozens of people at a time in a longer take and multiple high-octane strafe runs make the sequence very fun to watch. However, the main reason why I would rate this as one of the lower battle sequences is that, for starters, the ending is pretty much trash. Jaime charging Daenerys has to be one of the stupidest moments in any battle sequence. Then his plot armor saves him when Bronn comes out of left field to save the day, and somehow carries his heavy armored ass out of the lake. There are also some other questionable decisions made by Daenerys, like destroying a lot of the supplies, not doing a strafe run down the front line of soldiers, and how the hell she was able to get from Dragonstone to Highgarden so quickly. Besides some of those stupid aspects, it's still a gripping sequence that shows just how scary and deadly dragons are in war. Number 12. Hodor. Similar to the death of Jon Snow, this scene was spectacular when it first came out. I literally watched it on repeat because of how shocked I was at the fact that Bran now had the ability to time travel. That, and I was kind of devastated that my boy Hodor got killed. It was a very well executed moment, and the parallel editing of going back and forth from Bran's perspective in the past and to Hodor's perspective in the present made the scene much better. Then the progression of Hold the Door turning into Hodor was so brilliant. It kind of blew my mind that George R.R. Martin had this planned out, or maybe he didn't, but anyways, it's still an astonishing reveal. However, I think this whole scene loses a lot of its impact due to the sheer fact that Dumb and Dumber are too brain dead to even grasp the concept of writing time travel in a fantasy show. Then, from what they said in an interview, they wanted to heavily downplay the fantasy elements in the show.
We tried to keep that stuff to a minimum because we didn't just want it to appeal to a fantasy fan base.
Like, how can you just introduce the craziest and coolest concept in the show and then not use it? That's absolutely infuriating. I remember the love I had for this new ability that Bran possessed, but it slowly turned to ash in my mouth when it became clear that Bran devolved into being a creep who stares at people. Feels bad, man. If the show just ended after season 6, then Hold the Door would have been in my top 5 moments for sure. This was just a bit of George R.R. Martin shining through the veil of mediocrity that were the later seasons. Number 11. Battle of the Bastards. You may be upset that I'm putting this so low at the 11th spot, but as I pointed out before in my top 25 most stupid moments, and in my analysis on season 6, is that this whole sequence is really devoid of logic. I won't get into all the aspects that makes the sequence so stupid, but it rhymes with plot armor, dumb characters, lack of consequences, and deus ex machinas. Besides those writing flaws, I feel like the Battle of the Bastards is able to recover and still make it onto my top 15. This is hands down visually the most breathtaking the show has ever been though. The cinematography does everything you want in that it gives you plenty of wide shots to observe the action, gives you long takes, and just makes you dumbfounded by the sheer production value. And even shots that just look like a painting from how good the camera composition is. It's really gorgeous, while the action is so engaging because it's constantly evolving throughout the battle so that it doesn't become dull. Also, the pure carnage and onslaught is crazy. Horses are slamming into people, there are so many bodies that they're forming mountains, which in of itself is a bit goofy as to how fast it happens, but still, visually it's epic. Overall, had the writing have been on par for the other battle episodes like Blackwater and The Watchers on the Wall, then the Battle of the Bastards would definitely be higher on the list. Number 10. Hardhome. Personally, I don't think this is as good as Blackwater and The Watchers on the Wall. However, I enjoy it more than the other two battle sequences because there aren't any aspects that are overtly devoid of logic about it. You can point to the White Walker tossing Jon Snow around instead of just killing him right away as plot armor, but that still made for a cool moment when Jon Snow defeated him. My only quarrel with this battle, or massacre rather, is that there's an abundance of fast cut and shaky action. To instill a sense of chaos, you do need these elements, but I think David and Dan overused them. It can get very tiring and visually repetitive by relying on this type of action, which was a major issue in the Battle of Winterfell, although it was much worse there because it was also pitch black. But in Hardhome, the amount of longer takes with our characters is great, but I personally wanted more of that. Besides that one small flaw, the action is still impressive, and the sequence sets up the Night King as being one of the most formidable antagonists in the show. This shot of the Night King raising his arms as if he's taunting Jon Snow is so visually stunning. In terms of the entire show, I think this is the most iconic shot. Just a very chilling end that slows down the pacing to allow the audience to take in what the hell just happened. Number 9. The Purple Wedding. This is probably the most satisfying death in all of Game of Thrones, which in large part is a testament to how much of a spectacular villain Joffrey was. Jack Gleason absolutely destroyed the role, and it's a shame that he quit acting. The amount of sinisterism that was portrayed through the character and how unpredictable he was terrifying. Then his death, as satisfying as it was still able to instill a shred of sympathy. As Olenna said in Season 7, it looked like a terrible way to go, but man was that a crazy end to his character. That, and it leads to a great performance from Cersei freaking out and accusing Tyrion. Also, having his death be the primary driving force of conflict for Season 4 was so much fun. The aura of mystery and the whodunit nature of his death harkens back to what was so great about Season 1, when Ned was investigating the death of Jon Arryn. The only small thing I partially dislike about this scene is how long it is, but there's still a lot of great fun little moments spread throughout. And from the overly extended length of the scene, it makes it seem as though something bad is going to happen, so if anything it does help a bit. Number 8. Jaime's confession in the bath. For the dialogue alone, Jaime's delivery for each line is utterly mesmerizing.
And stand by while thousands of men, women and children burned alive. Would you have done it? Would you have kept your oath then?
I think delivering this monologue in a state where his character is so beat down helps the execution. He really has nothing left at this point given he lost his hand and he finally spills the beans about the truth of the Mad King. Not only is this perfect character building, but it also gives us a different perspective of the climax of Robert's rebellion. Not just a simple, he killed the Mad King, but a more genuine and grounded take that paints Jaime as the hero. Everything you thought about Jaime is now changed thanks to this character arc. That and muddying the line of good and bad through the scenario is genius writing. I love the conundrum of being a knight and following corrupt orders that contradict the values of actually being a knight. It makes for a much more real scenario instead of the black and white good versus evil that a lot of other fantasy works fall into. God, I love this scene. It hurts so much that David and Dan take a shit on this in Season 8.
Innocent or otherwise.
To be honest, I never really cared much for them. Innocent or otherwise.
Number 7. Blackwater. This is the first time that the show shocks the audience, and not in a traumatizing kind of way, but more in the sense of awe. This wildfire explosion is the epitome of a chef's kiss. From the pure behemoth of delight on the VFX side of things to even the great reactions from different characters. To me, this moment has really never been matched in terms of the wow spectacle factor until, say, the Great Sept Explosion. Here, we have a clever maneuver of strategy thanks to Tyrion, and this moment was built up to for the whole season. And this is just one moment from a whole battle sequence. We have the epic charge to the wall, Tyrion's arousing speech, and the Hound cutting people to bits. The only thing that I personally don't like from this whole sequence is how the pace gets slowed to a crawl whenever we cut back to Cersei and her drunkenly talking to Sansa. But overall, I was heavily engaged with this battle sequence because I genuinely didn't know where the show would go, given how the prior season went against expectations. That, and there wasn't a true villain in this battle since Stannis and Tyrion are both protagonists in their plotlines, which helps the unpredictable nature of how the battle turns out. Number 6. The Watchers on the Wall. Out of the 4 battle sequences, I think this one is the most well-rounded. One of the main aspects I like about this is the fact that the entire battle is constantly evolving in terms of shifting perspectives. It really shakes things up instead of it being Tyrion versus Stannis. In essence, this creates a lot of standout moments like Tormund versus Thorne, Jon becoming a leader, Gren holding the tunnel against the giants, Ed dropping the scythe, Samwell actually being useful, and other memorable moments. The choreography throughout is very impressive because there are multiple long takes in which people are always fighting in the background. So it makes it feel as though this is an epic battle where everyone is fighting for their lives. Then the ending of the sequence surprisingly gets really emotional with the death of Ygritte. The shift in music during this moment flows expertly, and I love Ygritte's theme. It perfectly helps the shift in tone, and the final slow-mo dolly shot that pulls back is breathtaking. Hats off to the Watchers on the Wall. Number 5. Oberyn versus the Mountain. I know that entire battle sequences have a lot to offer, but personally the next 5 points I love to death, and I can watch them at any point in my life and still be thoroughly entertained. Oberyn versus the Mountain easily qualifies as one of those scenes because it has everything you need in life. Chad Oberyn, Daddy Tywin, wicked action, lots of furious passion, witty dialogue, some beautiful shots, a stunning twist, and my favorite death in Game of Thrones. Similar to the Red Wedding, this moment literally paralyzed me and I looked exactly like Tyrion at the end of the episode. Writing this scene to make it where Oberyn essentially wins the fight, but gets blinded by his pursuit to find the truth about Elia Martell, which results in his death, is the perfect way to properly shock your audience. It's entirely within character for Oberyn to want this information, because that's what drives his character throughout Season 4. Not some shocking moment like in Season 8 when Rhaegal gets killed randomly, because that's just completely mindless. This is how you truly amaze your audience, because we don't expect George R.R. Martin to be a Mad Lad again and kill another main character like Tyrion, despite him being stayed by Jaime. But yeah, all the reasons I listed are why I adore this scene, and the only minor issue I have with it is the editing gets pretty cutty at times, but that can be forgiven since Pedro Pascal is doing most of the action. Number 4. The Courtroom Trial for Tyrion. Holy shit, was Season 4 a banger of a season. I don't know whether to call this the climax of the season because the fierce battle of dialogue that happens between Tyrion and Tywin is so riveting. The monologue that Tyrion delivers in this scene is my favorite monologue in the show, and it's so full of emotion. Peter Dinklage really goes all out in the scene, and it shows in comparison to later seasons where it doesn't really feel like he's trying anymore because of how bad the writing is. The courtroom trial just has so much payoff in terms of character interactions. So many callbacks to great moments that come soaring back to bite Tyrion in the ass. And speaking of that, this is probably the best scene with a big ensemble of characters, because they all have something of value to contribute. Unlike the finale of Season 7, where a lot of the main characters just became extras. Also, I always love it when the writers give you false hope with a potential solution with Jaime agreeing to leave the Kingsguard so Tyrion can live, just so that it can be squandered and the story goes in a completely different direction. It really adds to the bombastic twist in the end. And for that ending, I think that's one of the best line deliveries in the show.
So I will let the gods decide my fate. I demand a trial by combat.
Which is then followed by a piercing stare down between two rivals. Complete perfection of a scene. Number 3. The Great Sept Explosion. This is literally the last time David and Dan actually try to make a good scene. Although they just have writing credits, so who knows. But regardless though, the two main areas that are complete perfection is the music and cinematography. The fact that Ramin Djawadi didn't even get an Emmy for the season is pretty wild. Light of the Seven is one of my favorite tracks in the show, and it perfectly builds the tension within the entire scene. The layering and introduction of different elements in the track, like adding in the chorus when Pycelle starts to get shanked, sends chills down my spine. And that goes for every key moment in the scene where more and more elements in the song get added in. Then when everything comes together in the track, it all explodes in a monumentally climactic moment. This induces just as much awe as the Black Water explosion did, but this time it actually kills some bigger characters. Then the scene ends in literally the most haunting way possible, with Tommen killing himself. He honestly wasn't even that likable, but his death really sticks with you. Both in a traumatizing way, and in a meme way apparently. Number 2. The Death of Ned Stark. This moment is basically mandatory to be placed in the top 3 of any best moments list, or at least the top 5. I think it's absolutely ridiculous that WatchMojo put this moment at number 8 when they put Arya killing the Night King at number 5. This death really shapes the show as a whole because it sets the standard of tension and danger that surrounds every character. Ned Stark was the primary protagonist of Season 1, and by killing him, George R.R. Martin is essentially stating that no one is safe. Also, the scene is perfectly executed, from the multiple character perspectives, the set piece of the angry crowd feeling the adrenaline of the execution, and even in terms of editing where we get into Ned's headspace as the sound drowns out and we visually see close-ups showing how terrified Ned is. That, and I love the build-up to this scene. The fact that the entire first half plays as if Ned was going to be let go really sells the surprise reveal. Because everyone logically goes, okay, this is building up to the outcome that Ned will survive, he'll be fine. But nope, George just has a gift for taking the story in surprising and fantastic directions. Number 1. The Red Wedding. Jesus Christ, can words even describe how traumatizing this whole scene is? The pure audacity that George has to kill not one, but two main characters in the overall story is insane. That moment when the Reigns of Castamere starts to play and Lady Catelyn immediately notices that something is wrong is such a great small touch. It helps the audience know something is off, since on my first watch through, I didn't really remember what the Lannister theme was. And speaking of first watch throughs, I know at least some of you watching this made a friend or family member watch the show, just so you can see their reaction to the scene. You sadistic animals. I'm really happy I went into the show having not known about this twist, because it really comes out of nowhere. For the Purple Wedding, you at least know something bad may happen, but here, we're with one of the main plot lines. Surely they won't pull another Ned Stark situation, right? Right? But yeah, overall, it was such a tragic scene, and the gruesome violence really adds to the shock value that we endured. I don't think anything can ever really match this layer of mortifying shock that this scene puts you in. From that alone, the Red Wedding has my full respect. So yeah, those are my top 25 best moments in Game of Thrones. There's not much need to make this video any longer with a long conclusion, given that it's shaping up to be about 31 minutes. Whoa Jack, so much editing. Regardless though, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you have a suggestion for another ranking video, let me know since I generally read through most of the comments, especially if you're early. Have a nice day, and if you like this video, I made another ranking video on the top 25 most stupid moments.